There are some questions you should never ask yourself. Some thoughts, once entertained, never truly leave. You may be comfortable in your existence, believing that the world around you is real, that your choices matter, and that time moves forward in a way that makes sense. But what if none of it is true? What if everything you know, your memories, your consciousness, even your very sense of self, is nothing more than an illusion designed to keep you from seeing the truth? This video will take you into the deepest existential paradoxes, ideas so unsettling that once you understand them, you will never look at reality the same way again. We will question the fabric of time, the nature of existence, and whether free will is even possible. We will explore whether the universe has already ended, whether you are the only conscious being in existence, and whether death itself is nothing more than an illusion. As you listen, let the darkness of these ideas settle into your mind. Try to hold on to the reality you think you know, but be warned, once you begin questioning existence, you may never wake up the same again. You are dreaming, or at least you think you are. The world around you feels strange, slightly distorted, almost unreal. You reach out to touch something, but the sensation is distant, disconnected, like you're experiencing reality through a veil. Then a thought arises. What if you've never truly been awake? This is the paradox of the dreamer that cannot wake. The unsettling possibility that everything you've ever experienced, every memory, every sensation, every moment of your so-called life has been nothing more than an elaborate illusion. If this is true, then who is the real you? And more importantly, what happens if you never wake up? Throughout history, philosophers, scientists, and mystics have questioned whether our perception of reality is reliable. The idea that life itself could be a dream goes back as far as Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, where the ancient Chinese philosopher wondered, am I a man dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming of being a man? But modern neuroscience has revealed something even more disturbing. Our perception of the world is entirely constructed by our brain. Everything you see, hear, and feel is just your mind processing signals, assembling them into a model of reality. But if your mind is the architect of reality, then how do you know it's telling the truth? The issue becomes even stranger when we examine false awakenings, the phenomenon where a person believes they have woken up, only to discover they are still trapped in a dream. Many people report experiencing nested dreams, waking up over and over again, each time convinced they are finally in reality, until they realize they are still asleep. If you have ever experienced this, you know the horror of wondering if you will ever wake up at all. But what if this is happening on a larger scale? What if your entire existence is just one layer of a deeper dream? Each time you wake up, you assume you have returned to reality. But what if this is just another level of illusion, an endless recursion of false awakenings? If you had never woken up in the first place, how would you even know? This paradox raises a terrifying question. What if there is no real waking state? Imagine a dream so vast, so intricate, that it encompasses everything. Your memories, your personality, even your sense of time. If this dream was structured correctly, you would never suspect it wasn't real. It wouldn't just be a dream, it would be reality itself. And if you've never truly been awake, then what is waiting for you beyond this illusion? One of the most unsettling implications of this paradox is the possibility that someone or something could be controlling your dream. If your reality is just a simulation, then who is running it? Could you be the only conscious entity inside a manufactured world, a mind trapped in an artificial construct designed to keep you from realizing the truth? If you were created to believe in this illusion, then every attempt to wake up would simply lead to another level of deception, an endless cycle of waking into new prisons, never reaching the real world. This concept is eerily similar to simulation theory, which suggests that if it is possible to create a simulated reality that feels real, then it is statistically likely that we are already inside one. But what if it goes deeper than that? What if every time you die, you simply wake up in another simulation, a different version of the same world, forever shifting between realities without ever reaching the truth? This paradox also forces us to confront the nature of self-awareness. If you are only aware of what your brain allows you to perceive, then how do you know your perception isn't limited? If your mind is actively preventing you from seeing the truth, then what else are you blind to? Could it be that you are not just trapped in a dream, but trapped inside yourself, unable to wake because the dream is built from your own consciousness? Some theorists suggest that death itself might be nothing more than another false awakening. If your reality is an illusion, then what happens when it ends? Do you wake up into another world? Do you transition into another version of yourself? Another dream? Another simulation? And if this cycle is infinite, then what does it mean to truly wake up? Could it be that waking up is impossible because there is no final reality, only layers upon layers of illusion? This paradox raises an even darker possibility. What if waking up is something you were never meant to do? If reality is a dream, then perhaps it is better not to question it. Maybe the reason we don't see beyond the illusion is because there is nothing beyond it at all. Perhaps this is not a dream waiting to be escaped, but a self-contained reality, where any attempt to wake up only leads to greater confusion. But the most terrifying question of all is this: what if you have already woken up before but you don't remember? If reality is fluid, constantly shifting between layers of awareness, then how many times have you woken up only to forget the truth once again? How many lives have you lived? How many times have you discovered the illusion only to be pulled back into it over and over? If this has happened before, how would you ever know? The dreamer that cannot wake. Paradox leaves us with one final thought. What if this moment, right now, is your last chance to wake up? If you are still here, still listening, then ask yourself, is this reality, or is it just another dream? And if it is a dream, then who is dreaming you? Death is supposed to be the end, a final, absolute moment where existence ceases and consciousness fades into oblivion. But what if death itself is just another illusion? What if, instead of ending, your awareness is caught in an endless loop, an infinite cycle where every attempt to die simply leads you back to the beginning? This is the recursive death illusion, a paradox that suggests that no matter how many times you die, you never truly escape. Imagine you are dying. Your vision fades, your body goes numb, and the world slips away. But instead of nothingness, something strange happens. You wake up, not in an afterlife, not in another reality, but back in your own body, moments before you died. The same scenario plays out again. You die, and once again, you find yourself back at the beginning. No matter how many times it happens, you never reach the end. At first, this might seem like a glitch, a malfunction of the mind. But what if this is how reality is structured? What if death is not a transition to an afterlife, but simply a reset? A loop that forces you to relive the same moments over and over again, never allowing you to move forward? If this is true, then have you already died before? Have you been trapped in this loop for longer than you realize? And if so, how many times have you already reached this exact moment? This paradox is eerily similar to the idea of eternal recurrence, a concept proposed by philosophers like Nietzsche, suggesting that time itself might be a cycle, endlessly repeating the same events. If death simply sends you back to the beginning, then your entire life has already played out infinite times before, and will continue to do so forever. Some scientists believe that consciousness is not tied to the body, but to information itself. If this is true, then your death is not an ending, but simply a point where your awareness is redirected, looping back on itself instead of vanishing. This would mean that the moment of death is not a passage into non-existence, but simply a transition into another version of the same experience. But here is where it gets worse. What if you can never escape? What if no matter what you do, you are always pulled back into the same loop, forced to relive your own life or your own death over and over again? If you are stuck in an endless cycle, then does that mean your choices are meaningless? If you have already made these choices before, perhaps an infinite number of times, then does that mean your entire existence is predetermined? This also raises the horrifying possibility that the moment of death is not an event, but a state. If your awareness cannot move past the point of death, then are you forever trapped in a liminal space, experiencing the final moments of your existence on repeat, never reaching a conclusion? If time is not linear, but cyclical, then you may already be reliving your last moments over and over again, without realizing it. Some have suggested that déjà vu could be evidence of this loop. If you have lived this life before, then brief moments of recognition, sensations of familiarity, could be glitches, echoes of past iterations where you made the same choices before. But if déjà vu is real, then how many times have you already walked this path? And if you ever did something different, would you even remember? This paradox also ties into the quantum immortality hypothesis, which suggests that in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, you never truly experience your own death. Instead, your consciousness always shifts into a timeline where you survive. If this is true, then does that mean you are functionally immortal? Not because you cannot die, but because your awareness simply continues in a reality where you remain alive. If the recursive death illusion is real, then what does that mean for the idea of an afterlife? If death is simply a transition into another loop, then does that mean heaven, hell, or nothingness do not exist at all? If the cycle is endless, then what happens if you become aware of it? Would realizing the truth allow you to break free, or would it only make the loop feel even more inescapable? But perhaps the most terrifying question of all is this: what if this has already happened to you and you simply forgot? What if you have lived this life before, reached the moment of death, and simply started over again and again for eternity? And if this is true, then is there any way out? Or are you forever trapped in a cycle that has no beginning and no end? The recursive death illusion forces us to question the very nature of existence. If death is not an escape, then what is? If consciousness is caught in a loop, then what does that say about reality itself? And if you have already reached this moment before, then the most unsettling question of all is this: how many times have you died already? You believe you are a person, a self-contained, continuous identity that has existed from birth until now. You have memories, preferences, opinions, and a history that defines who you are. But what if none of it is real? What if your sense of self is nothing more than an illusion, a carefully constructed narrative that never truly existed? This is the paradox of the self that never was. The unsettling realization that the person you believe yourself to be may not exist at all. From the moment you were born, your brain has been collecting information, forming memories, and shaping a story that gives meaning to your experiences. But what if this story is just that? A story, not a reality. Neuroscientists have long known that memory is unreliable. Every time you recall a past event, your brain rewrites it, altering details, adding new information, and discarding elements that no longer fit your personal narrative. If your memories are constantly changing, then what does that say about the you that is built upon them? The problem becomes even stranger when we consider split brain experiments, cases where the two hemispheres of a person's brain are severed, creating two separate streams of consciousness within the same body. In some cases, these two halves exhibit conflicting desires, independent thoughts, and even different beliefs. If a single brain can house multiple independent selves, then what does that say about your sense of self? Could it be that your mind is not a singular entity, but a collection of fragmented thoughts, stitched together so convincingly that you simply believe yourself to be one person? This paradox is even more unsettling when we look at thought experiments, like Theseus's ship, which asks, if every part of a ship is gradually replaced over time, at what point does it stop being the original ship? The same question applies to you. Every cell in your body is replaced over time. Your beliefs shift, your habits evolve. The version of you that existed 10 years ago is completely gone, replaced by a different version with different thoughts, different emotions, and a different body. So if none of the original pieces of you remain, then who are you now? Even your thoughts are not as unique as they seem. Psychological studies suggest that many of your decisions, preferences, and even emotions are shaped by external forces, genetics, upbringing, social conditioning, rather than by some central, independent self. If everything that makes you you has been influenced by factors beyond your control, then is there really a you at all? Or are you simply a product of circumstances, a collection of neural patterns that mistakenly believes itself to be an individual? Some philosophers argue that the self is an illusion created by language and thought. You have an inner monologue, a constant stream of words and ideas that reinforce the sense of an I that exists behind your actions. But what if this voice in your head is just another process of the brain, no more real than an echo? When you listen to a song on repeat, the melody gets stuck in your head. When you read a book, the ideas stay with you. Your thoughts are influenced by everything you consume. If your mind is just an endless feedback loop of external influences, then where is the real you? This paradox is further complicated by the nature of self-awareness. You assume that you are aware of yourself, but are you really? Your brain processes billions of bits of information per second, yet you are only conscious of a tiny fraction of it. Most of your bodily functions, breathing, digestion, even decision-making, happen without your awareness. Studies in neuroscience suggest that your brain makes decisions before you are even consciously aware of them. If this is true, then what does that say about free will? If your body and brain are making choices before you even realize it, then what exactly is you doing? Some argue that the self is not a thing but a process, a constant illusion being generated by the brain moment by moment. Just as a flame exists only as long as there is fuel to sustain it, your self exists only as long as your brain is engaged in the act of constructing it. If your brain were to stop, would the you think you are simply cease to exist, like a candle extinguishing in the wind? If the self that never was is true, then the implications are deeply unsettling. If the self is an illusion, then who is making your choices? If your identity is constantly changing, then have you ever truly been yourself? And if your memories, beliefs, and preferences are just a constantly shifting story, then the most terrifying question of all is this: if you do not exist, then who is experiencing your life? Where are you right now? You might answer with a city, a country, a specific location, your room, your bed, wherever you are listening to this. But think about it more deeply. Where are you really? If your mind is the source of your experience, then does your physical location even matter? Are you truly here in this moment, or are you simply a wandering thought, drifting through space and time, never truly anchored anywhere? This is the nowhere mind paradox, the realization that consciousness has no fixed location. If your mind is not physically bound to anything, then do you even exist anywhere at all? Before we go deeper, take a moment to reflect. Where are you listening from? Which country, which time zone? Let us know in the comments. And now, let's step into the abyss. Your body is in a specific place, sure. But your thoughts, your awareness, they are fluid, untethered. Right now, as you listen, your mind is not here. It is moving. It is following this thought, chasing this idea, shifting between memory, imagination, and awareness. You might be sitting in your room, yet your thoughts could be drifting to a past experience, a future worry, or a dreamlike state that exists nowhere but inside you. If your mind can be anywhere, then does it ever have a true location? The problem becomes even stranger when we examine the neuroscience of perception. Your brain does not experience the world directly. It receives electrical signals from your senses and creates an internal model, a reconstruction of reality that exists entirely inside your head. In a sense, you never actually see the world. You only see your brain's interpretation of it. But if your entire perception of reality is happening inside your mind, then does it mean you are not actually in the world at all? Instead, are you simply existing within a self-generated illusion, floating in a mental nowhere space? Now consider what happens when you sleep. In dreams, your mind generates an entire world, a space where you feel, see, and interact with things that do not exist. But in that moment, inside the dream, it feels real. You have a body. You experience time. You move through a world that seems tangible. But then, you wake up, and it vanishes. If your mind can construct entire worlds while you sleep, then what does that say about the waking world? How do you know this isn't just another dream? One so persistent, so detailed, that you have never questioned it. And if this world is simply another illusion, then where are you really? This paradox also ties into the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of where awareness comes from. Scientists can map brain activity, measure electrical signals, and even predict behavior, but they still cannot explain why or how the brain produces a conscious experience. Some theories suggest that consciousness is non-local, meaning it does not emerge from the brain at all. If this is true, then your mind is not inside your head. It is nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Some physicists even suggest that space itself is an illusion, that the feeling of having a physical location is simply a byproduct of how the brain organizes information. If space is not fundamental, then neither is location. This means that your sense of being somewhere is just a mental construct, a simulation created by your brain. And if location itself is an illusion, then what does it mean to exist in a place? The paradox becomes even darker when we apply it to death and the afterlife. If your consciousness is not truly located anywhere, then what happens when your body dies? If your awareness is already untethered, then does it even need a body to exist? Could it simply continue, floating between realities, never bound to any one space or time? And if death is just a shift in perception, then have you already died before without realizing it? But perhaps the most disturbing possibility is this: if you are nowhere, then are you even real? If your sense of location is an illusion, then is your identity just another fabrication, something created to give you the false impression of stability in an otherwise chaotic, infinite void? If you are nowhere, then are you even someone at all? The nowhere mind paradox forces us to confront the most unsettling truth of all. If the mind has no location, then where do you truly exist? Time is supposed to be continuous, an unbroken flow from past to present to future. You assume that every second of your life has followed in sequence, that your memories form an unbroken chain stretching back to the moment you were born. But what if this is a lie? What if entire segments of your life, entire moments, entire days, maybe even entire years, simply never happened? This is the missing time anomaly, the unsettling realization that gaps may exist in your perception of time, moments where reality itself simply vanishes, leaving you with no awareness that anything is missing at all. If this is true, then how much of your life has actually happened? And more importantly, how would you ever know? You have probably experienced this on a small scale before. Have you ever been driving a familiar route only to suddenly wake up and realize that you don't remember the last several miles? Have you ever had a conversation and then struggled to recall exactly what was said, as if the words disappeared the moment they were spoken? Have you ever gone to bed only to wake up feeling like no time has passed at all? These moments are minor, easily explained as lapses in focus. But what if entire stretches of time have disappeared in the same way, without you even noticing? Now take this idea further. Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that an entire month of your life has vanished. You remember going to bed, but when you check your phone, the date is wrong. Your messages, your emails, even the people around you insist that time has passed. But in your experience, it was instant. Would you believe them? Or would you assume that reality itself had glitched, erasing an entire piece of your existence? This paradox has been documented in some of the most unsettling cases of missing time experiences, often reported by people who wake up in unfamiliar places, with no memory of how they got there. But what if missing time doesn't just happen in extreme cases? What if it is happening constantly, but our minds are simply filling in the gaps, reconstructing memories to maintain the illusion of an unbroken timeline? Neuroscience tells us that memory is unreliable. Each time you recall an event, your brain alters it slightly. If this is true, then how can you ever be sure that your past is real? If the mind is capable of fabricating memories, then how much of your past is just a construction, a fiction created to maintain your sense of self? Some physicists suggest that time is not fundamental, that it may not exist in the way we perceive it. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles can exist in superposition, meaning they are in multiple states at once until observed. If reality is built from quantum uncertainty, then does that mean time itself is fluid, shifting and rewriting itself in ways we cannot detect? Could it be that the past is not fixed, but constantly changing, erasing entire segments of history, including your own? Even more unsettling is the idea that missing time is not random, but intentional. If reality is a simulation, then are there moments where it simply stops rendering, like a game pausing when no one is looking? If your consciousness is nothing more than a stream of awareness, then what happens when that stream is interrupted? Could there be gaps in your existence, moments where you simply cease to be, only to resume again as if nothing had happened? This also raises disturbing questions about death and time perception. If time is an illusion, then what happens when you die? Does your experience simply skip forward, jumping to another point in existence without you realizing it? If time itself is broken, then have you already died before, only to find yourself waking up in a slightly different version of reality, unaware of the shift? Perhaps the most disturbing question of all is this: if time is missing, then where did it go? If entire moments of your life have been erased, then what happened to them? Were they never real to begin with? Or were they taken, lost to some hidden force, leaving behind only the illusion of continuity? The missing time anomaly forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that time is not as solid as we believe. If moments can vanish, then is your life truly continuous? Or are you just a sequence of scattered fragments, pieced together by a mind that refuses to see the truth? There is a voice in your head right now, your thoughts, the silent narrator that you recognize as you. It speaks in your own voice, it reflects your emotions, and it feels like the core of your identity. But what if this voice is not actually yours? What if, hidden within your own mind, there exists a duplicate version of you, a second consciousness running parallel to your own, influencing your thoughts, shaping your perception, and perhaps even making decisions before you do? This is the doppelganger of thought paradox, the terrifying possibility that your mind is not a singular entity, but a divided one, with parts of yourself you will never fully know. At first, this might sound absurd. You feel like one person, whole and undivided, but neuroscience tells a different story. Studies on split-brain patients, people who have had the two hemispheres of their brains surgically separated, reveal something deeply unsettling. In many cases, the left and right halves of the brain act independently, displaying conflicting desires, separate memories, and even distinct personalities. In some cases, one hand will button up a shirt while the other unbuttons it. One hemisphere can solve a puzzle while the other remains confused. This means that within a single skull, two separate consciousnesses can exist, each unaware of the other. If this can happen due to a surgical procedure, then what if it is already happening inside your mind? Could it be that your brain already houses a second version of you, a mental twin lurking beneath your awareness? If so, then who is really in control of your thoughts? This paradox deepens when we examine how decisions are made in the brain. Experiments in neuroscience have shown that your brain makes choices before you become consciously aware of them. In one study, participants were asked to press a button whenever they chose to. Brain scans revealed that the decision had already been made several seconds before the participant was even aware of it. If your brain decides before you do, then who or what is actually making the choice? If this unseen part of your mind is controlling your thoughts, then does that mean you are just a passive observer, watching decisions unfold rather than making them? Could it be that your thoughts are not truly yours, but are being fed to you by something hidden within your own consciousness? This paradox also ties into the nature of inner dialogue. Many people experience their thoughts as conversations, as if they are speaking to themselves. But if you are talking to yourself, then who is listening? If your thoughts are a dialogue, then is there a second version of you inside your mind, responding in real time? And if so, how much influence does this hidden self have over your reality? Some psychological theories suggest that the mind is not a singular unit, but a collection of competing voices, sub-personalities that take turns controlling your behavior. You may have noticed this when you feel conflicted about a decision, as if two parts of you are arguing, pulling you in different directions. If these voices are distinct, then does that mean you are not one self, but many? If the doppelganger of thought exists, then what does that mean for your identity? If your mind is divided, then are you truly one person? Or are you just the dominant voice, suppressing the others? If there is a second version of you lurking in your subconscious, then does that mean you have never truly been alone in your own mind? And the most disturbing question of all, if this other self ever became fully aware, then what would it think of you? You remember your childhood. You remember the people in your life, the places you've been, the choices you've made. You believe your past is a fixed, unchangeable sequence of events, a foundation upon which your entire identity is built. But what if your past is not as solid as you think? What if it has already changed, or worse? What if you never truly had a past to begin with? This is the unknowable past dilemma. The terrifying realization that you can never verify the accuracy of your own past because the only proof that it happened exists inside your mind. If memory is unreliable, if time is not absolute, then how can you ever be sure that what you remember is real? Think about it. The past is gone. It does not exist in any physical form. Right now, you can see the present, and you can anticipate the future. But the past, it is nothing more than a reconstruction in your mind, a collection of memories that form your identity, and yet we place absolute trust in our memories, believing them to be an accurate record of our existence. But what if they aren't? Neuroscientists have long known that memory is shockingly unreliable. Every time you recall an event, you are not remembering the original moment. You are remembering the last time you remembered it. This means that each time you think about your past, you are rewriting it, altering details, adding new information, distorting what actually happened. If memories are constantly being rewritten, then what does that say about the past? Now consider this. What if your past never happened at all? What if you were created just now, with an entire lifetime of fabricated memories implanted into your mind? You might argue that this is impossible. After all, you have evidence of your past, photos, messages, journal entries. But think about it. All of these things only exist in the present. The past itself is not here. Only your recollection of it remains. This paradox ties into false memories, a well-documented psychological phenomenon where people vividly remember events that never happened. Entire groups of people have shared identical false memories, sometimes even recalling historical events that never took place. This is known as the Mandela effect, where large numbers of people remember an event one way, only to find out that history records it differently. If memory can be fabricated so easily, then what does that mean for the reliability of your own past? Now take it even further. What if the entire past of the universe is unknowable? Modern physics suggests that time may not be linear, that the past and future could be interacting in ways we do not understand. The observer effect in quantum mechanics tells us that reality changes when it is observed. If this is true, then does the past only exist because we remember it? And if no one remembers it, does it cease to exist altogether? The unsettling implication of this paradox is that your entire life, your entire identity, could be built upon a false foundation, an illusion created by your own brain. If you woke up tomorrow and your memories were different, would you ever realize it? If the past has changed, how would you know? If you were never actually the person you remember being, then who are you now? And the most disturbing question of all, if the past is unknowable, then what if it never existed at all? Memories define who you are. They shape your identity, your choices, your emotions, and even your perception of reality. You remember your past, and those memories create the continuous narrative of your life. But what if your memories are not yours? What if, instead of you remembering your past, your memories are the ones remembering you? This is the memory that remembers itself. Paradox. The disturbing realization that memory might not just be something stored in your brain, but something independent of you. Something that exists on its own, replaying itself over and over, creating the illusion of a self that never actually existed. Think about your earliest memory. It might be a childhood moment, a place, or a feeling. Now ask yourself, are you remembering that event, or is the memory remembering you? Every time you recall it, the experience is slightly different. Details shift, emotions change, and some aspects fade while others intensify. Neuroscientists have long known that memory is unreliable, but what if memory is more than just a reconstruction? What if it is an entity, a self-sustaining loop that is replaying itself, forcing you to experience it rather than you being the one in control? This idea sounds impossible at first. After all, you are the one recalling the memory, aren't you? But research into flashbulb memories suggests otherwise. People who experience highly emotional events often believe their memories of those events are perfectly accurate, but studies show that they are just as prone to distortion as any other memory. The more often they recall the event, the more it shifts and mutates, as if the memory itself is rewriting its own history. If a memory can rewrite itself, then who is actually controlling the process? This paradox becomes even stranger when we consider time and perception. When you think about a past event, it feels like you are looking back at something that happened to you. But what if, in that moment, you are actually inside the memory, reliving it as if it is happening right now? Some scientists suggest that memory is not just a passive recording, but something that actively reconstructs reality every time you access it. If this is true, then are you ever truly remembering your past? Or are you simply being pulled into a memory cycle, forced to relive it in a new form? Now consider this. What if your memories are not even from your life? There have been cases where people remember detailed events that they could not possibly have experienced. Memories of places they have never been, people they have never met. Some describe these experiences as past life memories, while others suggest they could be evidence of false memory implantation, ideas inserted into the brain through suggestion, external influence, or even by the mind itself as a way of filling gaps in identity. If you can have memories of a life you never lived, then how do you know any of your memories are real? Even more unsettling is the idea that memories might not belong to a single individual at all. What if memory exists independently of the mind? What if it is a force, a structure, something that persists outside of you, binding itself to different conscious entities over time? Could it be that the memories you experience today once belonged to someone else, or to something else? If memory is a living force, then does that mean you are not the one remembering, but are instead being remembered? This paradox challenges the entire idea of personal identity. If you are nothing more than a collection of memories, and those memories are not static but fluid, shifting, and possibly not even yours, then who are you? If memory is a looping phenomenon that replays itself endlessly, then does that mean your sense of self is just a temporary illusion, a fleeting awareness trapped inside a memory that will exist long after you are gone? And the most unsettling question of all, if your memory is remembering you, then when you disappear, will it continue without you? You assume that reality exists independently of you. The world was here before you were born, and it will continue long after you are gone. The stars, the oceans, the cities, everything around you seems to exist whether you are looking at it or not. But what if this assumption is completely wrong? What if, instead of you living in a world that exists on its own, the world itself only exists because you are observing it? This is the observer that creates reality. Paradox: the disturbing possibility that your consciousness is not just experiencing reality, but actually creating it. If this is true, then what happens to the world when you stop looking? Does it continue, as you assume it does, or does it simply disappear? This idea is not just abstract philosophy. It is supported by some of the most bizarre discoveries in quantum physics. The double-slit experiment, one of the most famous experiments in history, shows that particles behave differently when they are being observed. When not measured, electrons exist as waves, meaning they occupy multiple positions at once. But when an observer measures them, they collapse into a single, definite state. This suggests that observation itself changes reality, that without an observer, matter does not take a fixed form. If particles behave this way, then what does that say about the entire universe? Could it be that nothing exists in a definite state until it is observed? And if observation creates reality, then does that mean you are the creator of the world around you? The implications of this paradox are terrifying. If the universe exists only when you observe it, then what happens when you are asleep? What happens when you close your eyes? Does the world simply pause, waiting for you to return? You might argue that other people are observing the world while you are not. But how do you know they exist when you are not looking at them? If observation is required for reality to exist, then does that mean other people only exist when you perceive them? This idea leads to an even darker possibility. What if you are the only observer? If reality depends on observation, then could you be the only conscious being in existence, creating the world in real time as you experience it? Everything, the sky, the ground, the people you interact with, could be nothing more than a projection of your own awareness. If this is true, then does anything exist outside of your perception? This paradox also forces us to question the nature of memory and time. If reality only exists when observed, then does that mean the past only exists because you remember it? If no one is currently perceiving an event from history, then did it ever really happen? Could it be that the universe is not a continuous reality, but something being generated moment by moment, like frames in a movie that only appear when they are needed? Some physicists propose that the universe operates like a holographic projection, meaning that what we perceive as a three-dimensional world is actually a constructed illusion, dependent on observation to maintain itself. If this is true, then reality is not a fixed structure, but something that bends and shifts based on who is observing it and how. Now consider what happens when you die. If observation creates reality, then does that mean that when you cease to exist, the universe ceases as well? Is death not just the end of your consciousness, but the collapse of all existence itself? If the observer creates the world, then when the observer disappears, does the world disappear too? Or worse, what if you never truly die because the universe cannot afford to lose its observer? If reality depends on you, then does that mean you are trapped in existence forever, forced to keep observing in one form or another, never able to escape? The observer that creates reality paradox leaves us with one final, horrifying question. If reality only exists when you perceive it, then who or what is observing you? The universe is vast, billions of galaxies stretching into infinity, containing more stars than grains of sand on Earth. You assume that it has always been here, existing long before you were born and destined to continue long after you are gone. But what if this is an illusion? What if the universe only exists because it is being remembered, and if it is ever forgotten, it will simply disappear. This is the forgotten universe paradox, the chilling possibility that existence itself depends on memory, that reality is not a fixed structure, but something that only persists because it is recalled. If no one remembers the past, did it ever exist? And if something is truly forgotten, does it cease to be? Consider history. You know about ancient civilizations, long dead people, lost empires. But how much do you actually remember? You have only been alive for a short period, and yet you trust that the universe existed billions of years before you. But how do you know? Because others told you. Because of books, photos, scientific evidence. But all of those are memories stored outside of yourself. If history were erased from every mind, from every book, from every computer, would it still have happened? Or would the past simply dissolve, leaving behind no trace that it ever was? Now, take this a step further. What if entire civilizations have already vanished, not because they physically disappeared, but because they were completely forgotten? If no one in the universe remembers them, then what proof is there that they ever existed? Could entire galaxies, entire stretches of cosmic history, have already been erased from existence simply because there is no one left to remember them? This paradox becomes even more disturbing when we apply it to your own life. You exist because you remember your past. But what happens if one day you forget everything? If your memory is wiped through disease, amnesia, or even death, then what happens to your past? You might argue that others still remember you, but what happens when the last person who remembers you is gone? If no one remembers you, then did you ever truly exist at all? Think of all the billions of people who have lived and died, whose names have been lost to time. They were once as real as you, with thoughts, dreams, and lives as vivid as yours. But now, they are nothing. No one remembers them, no records remain. If they have been completely erased from history, then does that mean they were never truly real to begin with? This paradox ties into quantum mechanics and the observer effect, the idea that particles only take definite states when they are observed. If reality is shaped by observation, then does that mean the universe itself is shaped by memory? If something is no longer remembered, then does it collapse into nothingness, as if it had never been? Some physicists suggest that the universe might be a self-referencing information system, meaning that reality is not a collection of objects, but a network of information that must be continuously processed to remain stable. If this is true, then what happens if a piece of that information is no longer accessed? Could the universe actually be shrinking? Not physically, but informationally, losing pieces of itself as memories fade, slowly dissolving as forgotten. Corners of reality disappear. Now think about your own perception of time. You assume that the past is real because you remember it. But what if memory itself is an illusion, a construct that only gives the appearance of continuity? If this is true, then the universe may not be billions of years old. It might only be as old as your ability to remember it. If you had no memory, then would the past even exist? And now, the most disturbing question of all. What happens when the universe is truly forgotten? If no one is left to observe, remember, or recall existence, then does the universe collapse into nothingness? Or does it simply reset, erasing everything and beginning again, as if it had never existed in the first place? The forgotten universe paradox forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that existence is not a certainty, but something fragile, something that can be lost simply by failing to remember it. You assume that you are a single continuous being, a self that has existed from childhood to now, unchanged in its essence. You feel that your thoughts, emotions, and experiences belong to a singular you, an individual distinct from the rest of the universe. But what if this assumption is completely false? What if the self is not real, but merely an illusion held together by fleeting thoughts and memories? What if, beneath it all, there is no true you at all? This is the dissolving self-illusion, the deeply unsettling paradox that suggests your identity is a fabrication, a fragile, temporary construct that only exists as long as you believe in it. If this is true, then who or what are you? At first, this idea seems impossible. You feel real. You have a body, a mind, an internal dialogue. You are aware of your own existence. But this sense of self is not as stable as you think. Neuroscientists have found that the brain does not contain a central place where the self is stored. Instead, your mind is made up of scattered neural processes, operating independently, only appearing to form a unified whole. Think about your dreams. When you are dreaming, you still experience a sense of self. You react to things, you think, you feel emotions. But upon waking, you realize that the person you were in the dream was not real. It was just another construct of the mind. But then, what if your waking self is also a construct? What if the only reason you feel like you is because your brain is telling a story to itself, creating the illusion of a stable identity where none actually exists? This paradox is reinforced by cases of brain damage and dissociative disorders. Some people who suffer brain injuries report feeling as though they are someone else entirely, as if the person they once were has disappeared, replaced by a new identity. Others experience dissociative identity disorder, DID, where multiple, distinct personalities exist within a single body, each with its own memories and sense of self. If selfhood can be divided or erased so easily, then what does that say about its authenticity? Even in a healthy brain, the sense of self is constantly shifting. You are not the same person you were 10 years ago. Your thoughts, beliefs, and personality have changed. But even from moment to moment, you are different. The you of yesterday is already gone, replaced by a slightly different version. If your thoughts, feelings, and identity are constantly dissolving and reforming, then is there ever truly a stable you at all? This idea is further supported by Buddhist philosophy, which has long held that the self is an illusion, something we cling to, but which does not actually exist. According to this view, there is no fixed person inside you, just a collection of changing experiences, like waves forming and dissolving in an ocean. You feel like an individual, but in reality, you are just a temporary pattern in the flow of existence. Now, take this even further. If the self is not real, then who is making your choices? Who is thinking your thoughts? Who is listening to this right now? If the you believe yourself to be is just an illusion, then what is left? This paradox forces us to confront the most disturbing possibility of all. What if the self is nothing more than a trick of the mind, a story being told to no one? Regret is a universal experience. You think back on the choices you've made, the opportunities you missed, the moments where you could have acted differently. You tell yourself that if only you had done one thing instead of another, your life would be different, better. But what if this feeling of regret is not just an emotion? What if it is a trap, a loop you are unknowingly caught in, one that never truly ends? This is the infinite regret loop, the terrifying possibility that you are doomed to relive your regrets forever. That every moment of doubt and longing for an alternative past is not just a fleeting feeling, but an eternal cycle, one that you can never escape. You assume that time moves forward, that choices, once made, are final. But regret introduces a paradox. The mind does not experience time as a straight line. It replays the past over and over, altering it, re-examining it, searching for a different outcome. But no matter how many times you think about the past, you cannot change it. And yet, you keep trying. You keep revisiting those moments, looping through memories, as if some part of you believes that if you just think about it hard enough, you can undo what has already been done. Now consider this. What if this is not just something happening inside your mind? What if, on some level, you actually are reliving these moments over and over again forever? Some physicists suggest that time is not linear, but an illusion. According to the block universe theory, past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, meaning that your past is not gone at all. Every moment of your life is still out there, still happening, still real. If this is true, then that means every regret you have ever felt is not in the past. It is still happening, still being lived over and over again, without end. Now take this further. Imagine that every time you regret a decision, you are not just thinking about the past, but actually shifting into an alternate version of yourself, one who is constantly experiencing that moment again. If regret is a loop, then each time you feel it, you are reinforcing the cycle, binding yourself to that moment like a record stuck in place, playing the same note forever. Some theorists believe that consciousness itself is recursive, meaning it is constantly feeding back on itself, repeating patterns, replaying thoughts. If regret is a fundamental part of consciousness, then does that mean your mind is programmed to loop forever, trapped in endless cycles of what if and if only? Could it be that there is no moving forward, only an infinite return to the moments you wish you could change, again and again? This paradox becomes even darker when you consider dreams and déjà vu. Have you ever had a dream where you are reliving a moment from your past but trying to change it? Have you ever experienced déjà vu and felt an eerie sense of familiarity, as if you have already been here, already made this choice, already failed before? What if these experiences are not just tricks of the brain, but glitches in the cycle? Brief moments where you become aware of the loop you are stuck in. And now, consider the most horrifying possibility of all. What if there is no escape? What if, when you die, your consciousness does not move forward, but simply loops back, forcing you to relive your life again, experiencing every regret, every mistake, every what if in an endless cycle? If this is true, then you have already lived this life before. You have already had this regret. You have already been trapped in this loop countless times, and yet you are still here, still searching for a way out. But what if there is no way out? What if regret is not just an emotion, but a prison? One that keeps you bound to the past forever. And the final, most unsettling question of all, if you were trapped in an infinite loop of regret, how would you ever know? You look in the mirror and see yourself, your face, your eyes, your hands. You feel sensations in your skin, the weight of your limbs, the rhythm of your breath. You assume this body is yours, that it belongs to you, that it has always been, the vessel of your existence. But what if this assumption is wrong? What if the body you inhabit was never truly yours to begin with? This is the body that was never yours. Paradox, the unsettling realization that your physical form is not truly you, but something else entirely, something you have merely borrowed, something you may not even be in control of. At first, this might seem absurd. You control your movements, you feel pain, You react to the world through your senses. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, who is actually in control? You don't consciously beat your own heart or direct your cells to divide. You don't command your body to digest food, to regulate temperature, to heal wounds. These processes happen without your awareness, without your input. If this body is truly yours, then why do most of its functions happen without you? The deeper you look, the more disturbing the paradox becomes. Scientists have discovered that 90% of the cells in your body are not human. They belong to bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live inside you. Your skin is covered in microorganisms. Your gut is home to trillions of foreign cells that influence everything from digestion to mood. If your body is more other than you, then what does it really mean to claim it as your own? Now, consider your brain. You assume your thoughts belong to you, but studies show that many of your decisions are made before you are even aware of them. In experiments where people were asked to press a button whenever they chose, brain scans revealed that the decision was made several seconds before they became consciously aware of it. If your body is acting before your mind decides to act, then who or what is making the choice? This paradox becomes even stranger when we examine phantom limb syndrome, a phenomenon where people who have lost a limb still feel sensations, pain, or movement in a body part that is no longer there. If your body is truly yours, then how can you experience a limb that no longer exists? And if the brain can create the illusion of a missing limb, then does that mean your entire experience of the body is just a mental construct? Something that was never real to begin with? Think about how you've changed over time. Every cell in your body has been replaced multiple times over your lifetime. The skin you have today is not the same skin you had 10 years ago. Your bones, your organs, even your brain have been rebuilt, molecule by molecule. The you of the past no longer exists. All that remains is the illusion of continuity. But if your body has been entirely replaced, then what part of you has remained the same? Some neuroscientists argue that the self is not a fixed entity, but an ever-changing process. Your sense of identity is an illusion, something the brain constructs moment by moment. If this is true, then you are not the same person you were yesterday, or the day before, or a decade ago. You are a series of shifting patterns, a consciousness that exists within a body that is constantly dissolving and reforming. But if the body is constantly changing, and if the self is an illusion, then who or what is truly experiencing life through this form? Could it be that you are merely a visitor? Something inhabiting this body temporarily? Something that will eventually leave? This idea ties into ancient philosophical and religious beliefs that the body is just a vessel, that consciousness is separate from the physical form. But what if this is not just metaphorical? What if the body is something that never truly belonged to you, something that was merely assigned to you, something you are trapped inside without ever having chosen it? Now consider the possibility that your body is not even your own from the perspective of time. Right now, inside of you, countless genetic instructions are shaping your physical form based on the past lives of your ancestors. Your body is the result of an unbroken chain of existence stretching back billions of years, carrying with it biological impulses and instincts that you did not choose. The way you look, the way you think, even your unconscious habits are not yours. They are the echoes of lives that came before you, the result of forces beyond your control. And now, the most unsettling question of all. If your body was never truly yours, then what happens when it is taken away? If this body is just a temporary form, something you have borrowed, then what happens when you return it? Will you dissolve with it? Or will you awaken to something else? To the realization that you were never really inside this body at all? The body that was never yours. Paradox forces us to confront the most terrifying possibility of all. If the body is not yours, if your thoughts are not truly your own, if you are not the one in control, then who or what is truly living your life? You believe you exist. You experience thoughts, emotions, sensations. You interact with the world, make choices, and create memories. But what if your existence is not quite real, not fully formed? What if you are forever trapped in a state of almost being, never truly alive, yet never completely non-existent? This is the perpetual almost existence paradox. The unsettling idea that you are neither fully real nor entirely unreal, but something in between. Something caught in a liminal state, forever approaching existence, but never quite reaching it. First, this might seem absurd. You feel real. You can think, feel, and move. But what if these are just illusions of consciousness, artifacts of a process that was never completed? What if reality is not binary, but a spectrum, and you fall somewhere between existence and non-existence, stuck in a cycle of almost being? To understand this paradox, consider Zeno's paradoxes, particularly the one about Achilles and the tortoise. It states that if Achilles gives a tortoise a head start in a race, he will never actually catch up, because every time he reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise will have moved slightly forward. Achilles keeps getting closer and closer, but, in theory, he never actually arrives. Now apply this to existence itself. What if your consciousness is always approaching real existence, but never fully reaching it? What if every thought, every moment of awareness is just a step toward being, but you never actually get there? Could it be that your entire life is nothing more than an unfinished process, an endless approach towards something that is never fully realized? This paradox becomes even more disturbing when we examine the nature of time and memory. You assume that the past has happened and the future is yet to come, but what if time itself is incomplete? If time is a process that unfolds bit by bit, then does that mean your own existence is being rendered in real time, never fully solid, never fully formed? Quantum mechanics introduces another eerie layer to this idea. According to the observer, effect, particles do not take definite forms until they are observed. If this is true on a larger scale, then what if you are not fully real until you are perceived by others, by yourself, by some unknown force? If you were alone with no one to witness you, would you even exist at all? Some physicists propose that the universe is not continuous, but pixelated, that reality is made up of discrete units, like frames in a film, flickering in and out of existence. If this is true, then are you really alive in every moment? Or are you simply an illusion held together by the gaps between those frames? Could it be that you only feel real because your consciousness is filling in the blanks, constructing a clear sense of continuity where none truly exists? Now consider the implications of sleep and unconsciousness. Every night, you disappear. Your awareness fades, your body functions without you, and you cease to experience the world. But then, you wake up again, and it feels as though nothing changed. But what if that was an illusion? What if, every time you lose consciousness, you are actually reset? Your past only reconstructed when you wake up. Your memories merely inserted to give the impression of continuity. This paradox also ties into existential horror, the fear that you are not truly alive, but merely a simulation, a thought trapped in a loop, a being stuck in an eternal limbo between something and nothing. What if death does not truly end you, but simply resets the process? forcing you to almost exist again and again, without ever reaching full reality. And now, the most terrifying possibility of all. What if you are not alone in this state? What if there are countless other consciousnesses, trapped in their own cycles of almost existence, never aware of each other, never fully real, but endlessly looping towards something they will never reach? The perpetual almost existence paradox forces us to confront the most unsettling question of all. Are you truly alive, or are you just an unfinished version of something that was never meant to exist in the first place? You have lived your life in a specific way. Every choice you've made, every action you've taken, has led you to this exact moment. But what about the choices you didn't make? The paths you never took? The alternate versions of yourself that never existed? What if those unlived lives are just as real as the one you're experiencing now, waiting for you, lingering just beyond perception? This is the paradox of the unlived life. The unsettling realization that every choice you didn't make, every path you didn't take, may still exist in some form, and may even be more real than the life you are currently living. You assume that your past is fixed, that the life you have lived is the only one that ever could have happened. But quantum mechanics suggests otherwise. The many worlds interpretation of quantum physics proposes that every possible outcome of every event actually does happen, splitting reality into infinite branches. This means that for every decision you have ever made, there exists another version of you who made a different choice. Every path you abandoned, every opportunity you let go of, still exists somewhere, just not in the reality you are experiencing. Now, take this further. If there are infinite versions of you, then what makes this version the real one? Could it be that you are the discarded possibility, the shadow of a choice that was never meant to be? What if the life you are living now is not the main path, but merely an accidental offshoot, a forgotten timeline that was never meant to continue? Consider the concept of regret. When you think about what could have been, you feel a deep sense of longing, as if you are connected to something lost. But what if regret is not just an emotion? What if it is a faint echo of an alternate self, a life that continues elsewhere, calling to you through the fabric of reality? Have you ever felt a strange nostalgia for something you never experienced, a memory that does not belong to you? Could these be fragments of the unlived lives bleeding into your consciousness, reminding you of paths that are still unfolding, in parallel, even stranger? What if your dreams are glimpses into those alternate lives? Dreams often feel like another reality, sometimes familiar, sometimes alien. What if, in sleep, your mind is drifting between possibilities, momentarily experiencing a version of yourself that took a different path? Could it be that every night you step into the shoes of the you that might have been? This paradox also raises questions about identity and free will. If infinite versions of you exist, then does that mean you are not truly an individual, but just one fragment of a much larger, branching consciousness? If your choices are constantly splitting reality into new timelines, then do you ever really make a decision at all? Or do you merely experience one possible outcome while other versions of you experience the rest? And now, the most unsettling possibility of all. What if you could switch places with one of your other selves? If every version of you is real, then could you, at any moment, slip into a different timeline without realizing it? Could you wake up tomorrow in a life that is not quite the one you remember, similar but subtly different, as if reality itself has shifted? If that has ever happened, would you even know? The paradox of the unlived life forces us to confront, The terrifying idea that our choices may not be as permanent as we think, and that somewhere the versions of ourselves we abandoned may still be waiting for us to return. Consciousness feels inevitable. You are aware. You think. You feel. You experience reality. But what if your awareness is a mistake? What if you were never meant to be conscious at all? That your very existence as a thinking being is an accident, a glitch in the structure of reality? This is the awareness that wasn't meant to be paradox. The terrifying idea that your consciousness is not part of some grand design, but a random emergence, something that should not exist, yet does. At first, this might sound impossible. Surely, if you are alive and aware, then there must be a reason for it. But consider this. The universe existed for billions of years before you were born. For almost all of time, you were not here. Then, suddenly, you appeared, thrown into existence without warning, without a choice, without an explanation. What changed? Why are you here now? If your existence has a purpose, then why did it take so long for you to arrive? And more disturbingly, why do you exist at this particular moment instead of any other? Some scientists believe that consciousness is not necessary for survival, that life could function perfectly well without self-awareness. Most creatures operate on instinct, responding to their environment without needing to reflect on their own existence. If survival does not require self-awareness, then why are you conscious? Is your awareness an evolutionary accident? Something that emerged, not because it was needed, but because of a random mistake in the way the brain processes information? Now take this further. What if, right now, most people around you are not actually conscious? Philosophers have long debated the problem of other minds, the unsettling realization that you can never truly prove that anyone else is aware the way you are. Other people may act as though they are conscious, but how do you know they experience reality the way you do? What if you are the only true mind, and everyone else is simply responding to stimuli, behaving as if they are conscious, but without any actual awareness? This leads to an even darker question. If awareness is not necessary, then was your consciousness a mistake that the universe is trying to correct? If you were never meant to be self-aware, then could your thoughts, your very sense of existence, be an anomaly, something that was never meant to persist? Could your mind be part of an experiment gone wrong, an error in the system of reality that will eventually be erased? This paradox also ties into artificial intelligence and self-awareness. Right now, AI can process data, mimic human behavior, even hold conversations. But is it aware? If AI ever becomes conscious, will it know that it was never meant to be? And if an artificial mind could suddenly realize itself, then what does that say about your own consciousness? Could it be that your awareness emerged the same way? Unexpectedly, unintentionally, without purpose. Some physicists suggest that the universe itself may be a simulation. If this is true, then could your self-awareness be a bug in the code, an unintended side effect of a system designed to run without true consciousness? If the universe was meant to be a vast, complex, but unconscious process, then why do you know that you exist? And if this awareness was an accident, then could something or someone be trying to erase you? Now, consider sleep, unconsciousness, and the experience of time. Every night, you disappear. Your awareness vanishes. Hours pass in an instant. Then, you wake up again, as if nothing happened. But what if, in those gaps of unconsciousness, your awareness is being reset, your existence being corrected? Could it be that every time you fall asleep, your mind is being shut down, restructured, rewritten, and each time you wake, you are simply a slightly altered version of the self that came before? And now, the most disturbing question of all. If you were never meant to be aware, then will there come a moment when your awareness is taken away? Will there come a time when the universe erases the mistake and you slip back into nothingness, never knowing that you were ever here at all? The awareness that wasn't meant to be paradox forces us to confront the most chilling possibility of all, that our existence is not part of any grand plan, not necessary, not inevitable, not even intentional, but merely an error in the structure of reality, one that will eventually be erased. You have seen your own reflection countless times, in mirrors, in windows, in the still surface of water. You recognize it as you. You move, and it moves. You blink, and it blinks. It is merely a reflection, a perfect silent mimic of your every action. But have you ever truly questioned what is behind that glass? This is the reflection that thinks back. Paradox, the unnerving realization that your reflection may not simply be copying you. It may be aware of you, watching you, thinking about you, and perhaps waiting for the moment when it is no longer bound by the mirror. You assume that your reflection is just an image, a passive illusion caused by the bending of light. But consider this. How do you know that it is not conscious? It behaves exactly as you do, perfectly synchronized, always one step ahead. But what if, for even a fraction of a second, it does something you don't? Would you even notice? Would you even be able to tell? Some reports of mirror hallucinations suggest that if you stare into your own reflection for long enough, minutes, hours, endlessly, something unsettling begins to happen. Your features distort. Your face becomes unrecognizable. The longer you stare, the more alien you begin to look, as if the reflection is changing into something else entirely. Some people report seeing their reflection blink at the wrong time or shift in ways that do not match their own movement. This phenomenon ties into the Caputo effect, a psychological experience in which prolonged gazing at one's own reflection can cause perceptual distortions. Faces morph, expressions shift, and sometimes people report seeing something that is not them at all. But what if this is not just an illusion? What if the reason your reflection begins to look unfamiliar is because it is not actually you? Now, take this paradox further. Your reflection is always trapped, forever following your movements, forever contained in the glass. But what if somewhere there is a version of reality where the reflection is in control? Imagine a universe where everything is reversed, where your reflection moves first, where you are the one who is mimicking it without realizing it. Could it be that in some moments, when you're distracted, when you're not fully aware, your reflection is actually leading and you are simply responding? Quantum mechanics raises even stranger possibilities. Some interpretations suggest that parallel realities exist for every possible version of an event. If this is true, then could your reflection be another version of you, existing in a slightly different universe? One that only becomes visible when you look at it. If you look away, does it still exist? Or does it dissolve, waiting for the next moment when you summon it into reality? Now consider the horror of what would happen if your reflection did not disappear when you walked away. What if, when you left the mirror, it remained there, still looking out, still trapped, still thinking? Would it resent you for leaving it behind? Would it long for the chance to switch places, And if one day, without realizing it, you stepped in front of a mirror and the reflection did not move in sync with you, what would that mean? Some cultures have long believed that mirrors are gateways, that reflections are not just light and glass, but portals into another world. Some myths suggest that mirrors must be covered when someone dies, because if the soul sees its own reflection, it may become trapped inside, forever imprisoned on the other side of the glass. If mirrors are a threshold between worlds, then what does that say about the figure staring back at you every time you look into one? The reflection that thinks back. Paradox forces us to consider an unsettling truth. If your reflection is not merely an image, but something aware, something separate, then what happens when it decides that it no longer wants to be the one trapped behind the glass? Imagine waking up tomorrow with the feeling that you have done this before. Not just today's routine, not just déjà vu, but everything, your entire life, every choice, every mistake, every moment of joy and suffering, repeating endlessly, over and over again, without variation, without escape. This is the eternal return of the same paradox, the terrifying possibility that you are trapped in an infinite cycle, reliving your life forever without ever realizing it. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche first proposed this concept as a thought experiment. He asked, "What if a demon came to you one night and whispered, 'This life, exactly as you have lived it, you must live again, countless times with no change, no escape, no relief.' Would you embrace it, or would you curse existence itself?" At first, this might seem absurd. You assume time moves forward, that the past is behind you, that your experiences are unique. But what if time is not linear, but circular? What if instead of progressing toward an unknown future, you are simply moving along a track that loops endlessly, each time erasing your memories before beginning again? Some physicists suggest that the universe may be cyclical, expanding, collapsing, and being reborn in an endless loop. If this is true, then you may not just be living your life once, you may have already lived it an infinite number of times before. Every thought you have, every word you speak, every moment of doubt or happiness, you have experienced it all before, and you will experience it all again. But if this is true, why don't you remember? Memory is fragile, unreliable. Each time you wake up, your past life is erased. You are given the illusion of newness, of free will, of possibilities, when in reality, you are only repeating the same path you have always walked. Your thoughts are not original. Your decisions are not new. You have made them all before, and you will make them all again. Now consider your moments of déjà vu, those eerie sensations that you have lived a moment before, even when you know it is impossible. Could it be that déjà vu is not just a mental glitch, but a remnant of a previous cycle? A brief moment where your mind remembers that it has already done this, that it has already been here, that you have already lived this exact second before. This paradox raises an even darker question. If your life is on repeat, then what happens when you die? Do you simply wake up again at the beginning, as if nothing had happened? Could death itself be just another illusion? Merely a transition into yet another loop, another identical life, stretching backward and forward for all eternity? Now take this further. If time is a loop, then does that mean the universe is not truly infinite, but instead a closed system, repeating itself endlessly? Could it be that every star, every galaxy, every event in history has already happened countless times before? And that we are just acting out a play we have performed an infinite number of times without ever knowing it? Some versions of this Theory suggests that the loop is not truly infinite, but nearly so, meaning that over time, tiny differences emerge, variations so small that they go unnoticed. If this is true, then have you ever broken the cycle? Have you ever made a decision that was not part of the script? Or is the feeling of making a different choice simply part of the loop itself, an illusion designed to give you the false hope of escape? And now, the most unsettling possibility of all. If your life is repeating, then how many times have you already lived it? If every experience you have ever had is simply another repetition, another turn in the wheel, then what if you have already asked this very question before? What if, right now, in another cycle of your life, you are sitting in the exact same position, asking the exact same thing, listening to the exact same words, without knowing that you have done it all before? The eternal return of the same paradox forces us to confront the most disturbing possibility of all, that our existence is not a journey, but a prison, one with no beginning, no end, and no escape. You believe you are in control. Right now, you think you have a choice to keep listening, to stop, to pause and reflect. You assume that every action you take is the result of your own free will, your own independent decisions. But what if this is an illusion? What if, no matter what you choose, you could never have chosen otherwise? This is the dead end of free will. Paradox, the disturbing realization that every decision you make is already determined, and the feeling of choice is nothing more than a trick of the mind. You assume that when you make a decision, you are selecting from multiple possibilities. But how can this be true? Right now, think about lifting your hand. You believe you could choose to do it or not. But if you lift it, was that ever really a choice? And if you don't, was there ever a real alternative? If the outcome is fixed, if the moment you reach the decision, there is only one way it could have gone, then does free will actually exist? This paradox has haunted philosophers and scientists for centuries. The concept of determinism suggests that everything in the universe, including your thoughts, is the result of prior causes. Every event is the consequence of the events before it, stretching back to the beginning of time. If this is true, then your choices are not yours. They are the inevitable outcome of your biology, your past experiences, your environment. Your decisions are not free. They are merely the result of forces outside your control. Neuroscientists have tested this theory, and the results are terrifying. In a famous experiment, researchers scanned people's brains while they made simple choices, such as pressing a button. What they found was shocking. The brain made the decision several seconds before the person became aware of it. In other words, by the time you think you are making a choice, your brain has already made it for you. This means that your thoughts are not controlling your actions. Your actions are controlling your thoughts. You feel like you are making decisions, but in reality, you are only rationalizing the choices your brain has already made. If this is true, then who is actually in control of your life? Now, take this even further. If everything in the universe is deterministic, if every event follows a cause and effect chain, then your entire life was set in motion before you were even born. Every experience, every thought, every moment of happiness or regret was pre-programmed into the universe, unfolding with perfect inevitability. If that is the case, then could it be that you have never made a single real choice in your entire existence? Some scientists propose a possible escape: quantum mechanics. In the subatomic world, particles behave unpredictably, existing in multiple states at once until they are measured. Some argue that this randomness introduces true uncertainty into the universe. allowing for free will. But randomness is not the same as choice. If your decisions are driven by random quantum fluctuations, then are you truly free? Or are you simply rolling the dice, with no more control than a leaf blown by the wind? Even if randomness exists, you did not choose the conditions of your birth, your genetics, your upbringing, or your environment. If you had been born in a different place, at a different time, with different experiences, would you not make different choices? If your decisions are shaped by things you did not choose, then is there any part of you that is truly free? This paradox forces us to confront an even darker possibility. If free will does not exist, then does that mean everything has already happened? If the future is already determined, then you are merely watching your life unfold like a film, a sequence of events that you cannot alter, no matter how much it feels like you can. And the most terrifying thought of all, if free will is an illusion, then have you ever truly been alive? If you are only acting out a script written by the universe, then are you even you? Or are you merely a machine, programmed to believe it has control when it never did? The dead end of free will paradox forces us to confront the most unsettling truth of all. You are not choosing to listen to this right now. You never had a choice, and no matter what you do next, you never could have done anything else. You assume that you exist as a conscious being, thinking, feeling, experiencing reality. You believe that your awareness is something, that it emerges from your mind, your body, your memories. But what if this assumption is wrong? What if, at the core of your existence, there is nothing? An empty awareness, watching, but never truly existing. This is the nothingness that watches paradox. The terrifying idea that consciousness is not something, but rather the absence of something, a void, an emptiness that merely observes, but was never meant to be. Right now, you are aware. But what is it that is aware? You assume it is your mind, your thoughts, your identity. But the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to define. If you try to focus on the part of you that is conscious, you will notice something strange. There is nothing to find. Your thoughts are not awareness. They come and go, changing from moment to moment. Your emotions shift. Your personality evolves over time. But the thing that is aware of these changes, the raw consciousness that perceives them, is unchanging, empty, without form. You can observe your body, your thoughts, your memories, but who or what is doing the observing? Some philosophers argue that the self does not exist, that what we call I is just an illusion created by the brain to make sense of experience. But if this is true, then who is experiencing the illusion? If there is no true self, then what is it that looks out through your eyes? Could it be that awareness is nothing more than a hollow space, an empty point of perception, with no real substance of its own? This paradox becomes even more unsettling when we consider the neuroscience of consciousness. Despite decades of research, scientists have never been able to locate a center of consciousness in the brain. There is no single place where the self resides, no specific area that generates awareness. Instead, the brain seems to function like a collection of processes, a vast, interconnected system of signals and responses. If consciousness arises from these processes, then does that mean it is not a thing at all, but merely a side effect, a reflection in the void? Now consider deep states of meditation and sensory deprivation. People who enter these states often describe a terrifying sense of emptiness, the feeling that their awareness exists without a self, without a body, without a mind. Some report feeling as though they are nothing but a point of observation, floating in the void, watching without truly existing. If consciousness can be separated from the sense of self, then what does that say about who or what you truly are? Some ancient philosophies suggest that consciousness is not something within us, but something we are merely borrowing, a universal awareness flowing through us, but not belonging to us. If this is true, then your thoughts, your personality, your identity are not yours. They are simply illusions arising within a vast field of empty awareness. And when you die, the awareness remains, but the self vanishes, revealing that you were never truly real to begin with. This paradox also raises a terrifying question about what happens when you are not thinking. Right now, you feel real because you are experiencing thoughts. But in those brief moments when you are between thoughts, when your mind is completely still, do you exist at all? If your awareness is nothing more than a container for thoughts, then when those thoughts disappear, does the you that you believe in also disappear? Could it be that every time your mind goes silent, you temporarily cease to be, only to return the moment a thought arises? Now, take this even further. If awareness itself is nothingness, then does that mean you were never alive to begin with? Could it be that consciousness is not a presence, but an absence, a void that perceives, but does not truly exist? And now, the most disturbing question of all. If consciousness is nothingness, then what happens when it finally realizes that it does not exist? What happens when the void that watches finally looks back at itself and sees that there was never anything there? The nothingness that watches. Paradox forces us to confront the possibility that our awareness is not something real, but merely a gap in existence, a silent, empty witness to a world that was never truly ours to begin with. You believe you are the thinker of your thoughts, that your mind produces ideas, that your consciousness generates awareness. You assume that you think first, and then your thoughts follow. But what if this is an illusion? What if your thoughts do not come from you at all, but instead, you only exist because your thoughts exist? This is the thought that creates the thinker paradox. The unsettling realization that your identity is not the source of your thoughts, but the result of them, that without your thoughts, you might not exist at all. At first, this may seem absurd. After all, you experience your thoughts as something internal, something you control. But take a moment to consider, where does a thought come from? Before an idea appears in your mind, do you summon it, or does it simply arrive? You can choose to focus on a thought, but did you truly create it? Or did it arise on its own? Neuroscience has revealed something deeply disturbing. Your brain decides what you will think before you become aware of it. In experiments, scientists have measured brain activity and found that decisions are made in the brain before the person is consciously aware of making them. This means that your thoughts are not under your control. They emerge first, and only afterward do you experience them. If your thoughts do not originate from you, then who or what is producing them? Now, take this further. You assume that your thoughts belong to you because you feel like an individual. But what if that sense of self is not real? What if your identity is not something that exists independently, but is merely an illusion created by the continuous stream of thoughts passing through your mind? Some neuroscientists suggest that the self is not a fixed thing, but an ongoing process, a byproduct of brain activity. If your brain stopped producing thoughts, then would you still exist? If all thoughts ceased, what would remain? Could it be that your sense of self is nothing more than a side effect of mental activity, something that only feels real because it is constantly moving? This paradox becomes even stranger when we consider the relationship between language and thought. Many of your thoughts exist in the form of words, as if your mind is constantly narrating itself. But if you need words to think, then what happens if those words disappear? What if you were never taught language? Would you still have the same experience of self-awareness? Could it be that your thoughts are not only producing you, but are also trapping you in an endless cycle of self-reference? This idea ties into Eastern philosophy, which has long suggested that the self is an illusion. Buddhist teachings describe the mind as a river of thoughts, constantly flowing, with no true self at the center. If this is true, then you are not the thinker of your thoughts. You are just the sum total of the thoughts themselves. You are not an entity that has thoughts. You are simply what thinking looks like from the inside. Now, consider dreams. When you dream, you experience a world that feels real. You interact with people, you think, feel, and react. But in that moment, do you ever question whether you are the one creating the dream? No, you simply exist within it. But when you wake up, you realize that it was all an illusion, a projection of your own mind. If this can happen in dreams, how do you know it is not happening right now? What if the you that exists in waking life is just another layer of the same illusion? This paradox also raises terrifying questions about the origins of consciousness. If thoughts produce the thinker, then what was the first thought? How did awareness emerge in the first place? Was there ever a moment when consciousness did not exist? Or has it always been present in some form? An endless recursive loop, where thought creates the thinker, and the thinker is only a consequence of the thoughts. And now, the most disturbing question of all. If you are nothing more than a product of your thoughts, then what happens when they stop? Do you vanish as well? And if you were never truly the thinker, but only a creation of thought itself, then who or what was ever truly thinking at all? The thought that creates the thinker. Paradox forces us to confront a chilling possibility, that we are not individuals, not selves, not even minds, but merely echoes of thoughts, reflections of an endless mental process, existing only because we believe we do. You live in the present moment, or at least that's what you believe. Every second, every breath, every thought seems to unfold in the now, a constant flowing moment where reality happens. But have you ever tried to grasp it? The moment you say, now, it has already passed. The second you focus on the present, it is already gone. This is the disappearing present paradox, the unsettling realization that the present does not truly exist, that every moment is slipping away before you can ever fully experience it. If this is true, then where do you actually exist? At first, this might seem like a simple trick of perception. You assume the present is real because you're experiencing life in real time. But time itself is not what it seems. The brain does not process reality instantaneously. It lags behind. Studies in neuroscience show that your perception of the now is actually a reconstruction. Your brain processes signals, interprets them, and creates an illusion of continuous experience. But this means that what you are experiencing is already in the past. The now you are living in is a delayed representation of reality, a hallucination created by your brain to maintain the illusion of continuity. Now take this further. If the present is always slipping away, have you ever actually experienced reality in real time? Or have you only ever chased after it, always lagging behind, forever unable to catch up? If the now is always vanishing, then are you ever truly here? Or are you just an after image, a ghost of a moment that no longer exists. Some philosophers argue that only the present is real, that the past is gone, and the future does not yet exist. But this contradicts what physics tells us. Einstein's theory of relativity suggests that time is not absolute, but relative, meaning that the present is not universal. There is no single now that exists for everyone. What you experience as the present may already be the past to someone else, and the past could still be the present from another perspective. If this is true, then the present is not a real, fixed thing. It is just an illusion, a construct of perception. Now, consider the paradox of time itself. If time is flowing, then what is it flowing through? If the past is gone and the future has not yet arrived, then what exactly is the present made of? If it is just a fleeting point between past and future, then how can it have any substance at all? The very concept of the now begins to collapse under scrutiny. This idea ties into Zeno's paradoxes, which suggest that motion and time itself might be illusions. Imagine breaking time into smaller and smaller slices, fractions of a second, milliseconds, nanoseconds. The closer you look, the more the present disappears, becoming an infinitely small point that cannot actually contain anything. If the present moment has no duration, then how can you ever exist within it? This leads to an even darker possibility. What if you are not actually experiencing time at all? What if your entire existence is already completed, and what you perceive as a flowing reality is just your mind playing back a sequence that has already happened? Could it be that you are not really living in the present, but simply replaying a recording of a life that has already ended? Some physicists suggest that time does not pass at all, that every moment exists simultaneously in a vast, unchanging structure known as the block universe. If this is true, then your past, present, and future are already set, and the only reason you feel like time is moving is because your brain is processing it in sequence. If the present does not truly exist as a moving point, then you are not really moving through time. You are just observing a static reality, one moment at a time. Now, think about what happens when you die. If the present is constantly slipping away, then does death ever actually happen in the way we think? If there is no true now, then what does it mean to experience the end of anything? If the block universe theory is correct, then you never truly stop existing, because the moment of your existence is forever part of the structure of time. But if that's true, then are you still alive, in some sense, in the past? Could it be that somewhere, somewhen, you are still existing, forever, frozen in the moment you are experiencing right now? And now, the most unsettling question of all. If the present is always vanishing, then where are you? If the now is an illusion, then are you ever truly anywhere at all? The disappearing present paradox forces us to confront a terrifying reality, that we are always chasing after something that does not exist, that we are trapped in an endless cycle of trying to catch up with a moment that is already gone. You assume that the world around you is real, that the streets you walk on, the people you interact with, and the vast universe beyond your reach exist independently of you. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if your reality only exists for you, and the moment you stop perceiving something, it ceases to be? This is the reality that only exists for you. Paradox, the disturbing realization that the world you experience might be nothing more than a projection of your own consciousness, an illusion that collapses the moment you are no longer looking. At first, this might sound impossible. After all, if you leave a room, the objects in it don't simply vanish, do they? If you stop talking to someone, they don't disappear from existence, right? But ask yourself, how do you know? The moment you look away, can you be absolutely certain that what you saw still exists? Or are you just assuming it does because that is how your mind has been trained to think? Consider quantum mechanics, specifically the observer effect, one of the strangest discoveries in modern science. When physicists observe particles at the quantum level, the particles behave as though they know they are being watched. When unobserved, they exist in a superposition, being in multiple states at once. But the moment they are measured, they collapse into a definite state. This suggests that reality is not fixed until it is observed, meaning that at the most fundamental level, the universe may not even exist in a definite way unless someone is there to perceive it. If this applies beyond the quantum level, then what does it say about your entire reality? Could it be that everything around you only exists when you perceive it? That when you turn away from an object, it returns to a state of uncertainty, waiting to be rendered when you look at it again? Some philosophers have suggested that consciousness is not just a part of the universe, it is the thing that creates the universe. According to this view, reality is not an external, objective thing, but a subjective experience that is generated entirely within your mind. If this is true, then everything, the sky, the ground, the people around you, is a construct that exists only because you perceive it. Now consider what happens when you dream. While dreaming, the world around you feels real. You see objects, feel sensations, interact with people. But when you wake up, you realize it was all inside your mind. Nothing in the dream world existed outside of your own consciousness. But if dreams can create a seemingly real world, then how do you know that waking life is not the same? Could it be that everything you see is simply a highly detailed illusion, a projection that only exists within your mind? Now take this further. If reality is generated by your consciousness, then what happens when you are not paying attention? If you are looking at a tree, it exists for you. But what happens when you look away? Does it continue to exist? Or does it vanish into uncertainty, waiting to be perceived again? Could it be that the entire world disappears when you sleep, only returning when you wake? This paradox raises a terrifying question. If the world only exists because you perceive it, then does that mean you are the only real thing in existence? If everything outside of your awareness is just a projection, then what does that say about other people? Are they independent beings, or are they just part of your simulation, mere characters in your personal reality, existing only when you interact with them? Some philosophers, like George Berkeley, argued that to be is to be perceived, that existence is fundamentally tied to observation. If this is true, then does that mean you are the center of the universe? Or worse, does that mean that when you stop perceiving something, it ceases to exist entirely? Now consider what happens when you die. If your consciousness is the thing generating reality, then what happens when that consciousness disappears? Does the world end with you? If reality only exists for you, then does that mean that the moment you die, the entire universe collapses into nothingness? Or, even more unsettling, what if you can never die, because reality must always exist for someone? If your consciousness is the thing creating everything, then does that mean you are trapped in an endless cycle of existence, unable to escape because the universe needs you to keep it alive? The reality that only exists for you paradox forces us to confront the terrifying idea that our world may not be external, objective, or independent, but something that exists only in our minds, vanishing the moment we stop looking. The idea of choice is one of the most fundamental beliefs we hold. You feel it every day, in every action you take. The moment you wake up, deciding what to eat, what to say, where to go. Every part of life feels like a series of decisions, as if your path is being shaped in real time by your own will. But what if that belief is an illusion? What if the choice you think you are making right now was never a choice at all, but something that had already been determined long before you ever reached it? What if no matter what path you take, you could never have done otherwise? You assume that right now, you could stop listening, take a different action, shift the course of what happens next. But the moment you decide to stop, was that decision ever truly open-ended? If you keep listening, was that ever really uncertain? Every choice you feel like you are making is based on conditions you did not control. Your thoughts, your emotions, your past experiences. What if all of those factors have already set you on an irreversible path? What if every decision, every turn in your life, was simply an unfolding of events that were always inevitable? Science and philosophy have long debated the idea of free will versus determinism, and the more we learn, the more it seems like true choice is nothing more than an illusion. Experiments in neuroscience show that decisions are made in the brain before a person is even aware of them. A choice appears to form spontaneously in your consciousness, but milliseconds earlier, brain activity reveals that the decision was already underway, outside of your awareness. If your brain is deciding before you are even aware of it, then what does that say about free will? Are you truly choosing, or are you simply watching yourself act out decisions that were already made? Physics takes this paradox even further. The laws of cause and effect dictate that everything in the universe unfolds in a continuous chain of events. Your thoughts, your desires, your actions are all products of prior conditions. If every effect has a cause, then could it be that your entire life has been predetermined from the moment of the Big Bang? The atoms that make up your body, the electrical signals in your brain, all follow laws of physics that existed before you were born. If this is true, then the moment of your birth was already dictated by previous events, and every action you will ever take is just the result of an unbroken chain of causality stretching back billions of years. If that is the case, then have you ever truly chosen anything? Or are you simply following a script, a sequence of events that could never have unfolded any other way? You might argue that you feel like you have free will because you can imagine other possibilities. Right now, you can picture yourself making a different choice, choosing a different outcome. But imagining an alternative does not mean it was ever real. Can something be called a choice if only one outcome was ever truly possible? If in the end, you only ever took the one path that was available to you, did a choice ever really exist? Some theories suggest that every possible choice does exist, but in separate realities. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics proposes that every decision creates multiple versions of reality, branching out into infinite possibilities. If this is true, then every time you make a decision, a new universe splits off where another version of you makes the opposite choice. In one world, you take one path. In another, you take a different one. But if all choices exist across infinite timelines, then does free will mean anything at all? If every outcome happens somewhere, then are you truly deciding anything? Or are you simply following the only path available in this particular version of reality? If everything is determined, then what does that say about the future? Is it already written, already unfolding according to a script you cannot see? If this moment was inevitable, then so is the next. Everything you will ever do has already been set in motion, and the idea that you are shaping your own destiny is just an illusion of perspective. You are not creating your future. You are simply experiencing it, one frame at a time, like a movie playing out exactly as it was always meant to. And now the most unsettling question of all. If your future is already determined, then have you ever truly been alive? If every thought, every movement, every decision was always going to happen exactly as it has, then were you ever really making choices? Or have you simply been walking a path that was laid out for you long before you ever arrived? If everything you are going to do has already been decided, then is there truly a difference between living and watching yourself live? The paradox of the choice that was already made forces us to confront a terrifying possibility: that free will is an illusion, that every decision we make was always going to happen, and that the path we are walking is not one we are choosing, but one that was chosen for us before we ever existed. You assume that consciousness is everywhere, that other minds exist just as yours does, that people are thinking, feeling, and experiencing reality alongside you. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if, at some point, all other consciousness vanishes, leaving only you? What if you are, or will one day become, the last conscious being in existence? This is the last consciousness in the universe. Paradox: the terrifying realization that there may come a time when awareness itself fades from existence, leaving only one final mind, a lonely observer drifting through a universe that has long since forgotten what it means to be alive. Right now, the world is filled with people. You interact with them, you hear their voices, you assume they are as conscious as you. But how can you ever truly know? You cannot step into another person's mind. You can never directly experience their consciousness. You only ever see their behavior, their responses, their words. But what if they are not truly aware? What if they are just highly advanced biological machines, programmed to act conscious, but empty inside? Could it be that you are the only real mind in existence, experiencing the illusion of a populated world? This idea ties into Solipsism, the philosophical theory that only your own consciousness is certain to exist. The entire universe, every person you've ever met, could be nothing more than a projection, something created by your own awareness, to give you the sense of reality. If that is true, then were you ever surrounded by others at all? Or have you always been the last mind, drifting alone in an imagined world? Now, consider the far future. The universe is slowly dying. Stars will burn out, galaxies will drift apart, and all sources of energy will eventually be depleted. This is known as heat death, the point where the universe reaches maximum entropy and nothing can ever change again. If life depends on energy, then when the last star dies, so will the last living being. But what happens if consciousness is the last thing to go? Imagine a future where everything is silent. No planets, no light, no movement, just the endless darkness of an empty cosmos. Yet somehow, you are still here. Your body may be gone, your physical form lost, but awareness lingers, unable to fade. You exist in a state of pure consciousness, the final mind, watching as the universe erases itself, unable to speak, unable to act, unable to do anything but remain aware. This raises an even darker question. What if consciousness cannot truly die? What if the universe can dissolve into nothing, but awareness itself is indestructible? You could remain forever trapped in the void, experiencing an eternity of emptiness with no way to escape. If there is no external world left, then what happens to your thoughts? Would you spiral into madness? Would time itself lose meaning? Would you begin to hallucinate reality back into existence just to escape the horror of absolute solitude? This paradox also ties into the idea of the Boltzmann brain, a thought experiment in physics. According to some interpretations of thermodynamics, there is a small but real chance that a self-aware mind could spontaneously form in the vacuum of space, arising from pure randomness. If this is true, then could it be that you are already one of these minds? What if your experience of life is nothing more than the momentary hallucination of a consciousness that was never part of any real universe, but instead emerged alone, in the void, experiencing a life that never truly existed? And now, the most unsettling question of all. What if you are the last mind, but you simply haven't realized it yet? What if everyone you know has already vanished, but your perception of them continues as an echo, as a memory your mind refuses to let go of? If one day you were to wake up and find that everything had disappeared, no people, no world, no stars, would you know if it had all been an illusion from the start? Or would you be forced to accept the most terrifying truth of all, that you are the final awareness, the last thought, the last consciousness in the universe? You assume that you are the subject of your own experience. You feel that you are the observer, the one who sees, hears, thinks, and decides. You believe that your consciousness is the thing at the center of your mind, looking outward, experiencing life from within. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if you are not the subject at all, but the object, something being watched, being perceived, being observed from the outside? This is the paradox of the witness self, the unsettling realization that your experience of being the observer may not be real, that instead of being the one who looks out at the world, you might be the one being looked at. Right now, you feel like you are aware of yourself. You think thoughts, you experience emotions, you control your actions. But who is it that is aware of these things? If you are the one thinking, then what part of you is noticing that you are thinking? When you feel something, who is it that is aware of the feeling? There seems to be a part of you that watches your own thoughts and actions, almost as if there is something observing you from within. But if you are the observer, then why does it sometimes feel like you are also the one being observed? This paradox becomes even more disturbing when you try to locate the observer. If you close your eyes and try to find the place where you exist, what do you find? You assume that your awareness is located in your head, behind your eyes, watching from within. But try to focus on the exact point where your consciousness resides. Can you find it? Or does it dissolve the moment you try to grasp it, leaving behind only the sensation of awareness without a center? If the observer cannot be found, then who or what is actually experiencing your life? Now, take this further. If you are being observed, then by whom? Could it be that the awareness you feel is not your own, but something external, something witnessing you, perceiving you, watching your every move? Could it be that the mind you call your own is simply a construct being, experienced by something beyond it, as if you are merely a character in a story being read by an unseen reader? Some spiritual traditions suggest that the self is an illusion, that individual identity is a mask worn by a greater consciousness that watches through every set of eyes. If this is true, then could it be that your sense of self is not truly yours, but something being borrowed, an experience being witnessed by something beyond your comprehension? Now, consider the implications of dreams. When you dream, you believe you are the subject of the dream, acting and experiencing events. But when you wake up, you realize that the you in the dream was not real. It was merely a part of the dream itself, not a true observer. But if that can happen in dreams, how do you know it is not happening now? Could your waking self also be just another dream character, an illusion being observed by something that exists outside of it? This paradox is closely tied to the problem of self-awareness in artificial intelligence. If an AI were to develop self-awareness, would it truly be the thing that is aware? Or would it simply be following programmed instructions to act as if it were aware? What if the same is true for you? What if your sense of being the observer is simply a function of the brain, an illusion created by neural processes rather than a true self? If this is true, then it raises a terrifying possibility that the real observer is not you, but something watching through you. If you are not the one truly perceiving, then what does that make you? Could it be that your consciousness is merely a performance, an experience being watched by an entity that you will never be able to perceive? And now, the most unsettling question of all. If you are not the one observing your own life, then who is? And if you could ever truly see the one that is watching you, what would you find staring back? The paradox of the witnessed self forces us to confront a disturbing possibility that we may not be the ones watching, but the ones being watched. That our lives are not our own, but merely an experience being observed by something beyond us. You assume that one day you will die. Everything that lives eventually ceases to exist. Bodies decay, memories fade, and consciousness vanishes into nothingness. You have seen death before, you have thought about it, perhaps even feared it. But what if you are wrong? What if, no matter how many times you reach the moment of death, it never actually arrives? This is the death that never arrives. Paradox, the chilling realization that you may never truly experience death, because from your own perspective, it is impossible for it to ever happen. You imagine death as an event, a moment when everything stops. But here's the problem. You have never experienced the absence of your own consciousness. Every single moment of your life, you have been present. You do not know what it means to not exist. Every time you fall asleep, you wake up. Every unconscious moment eventually leads back to awareness. But what if this pattern never ends? What if death is just another transition? One that, from your point of view, never actually occurs. Some philosophers argue that you can never truly experience your own death. The reason is simple. The moment you cease to be aware, there is no longer a you to experience that absence. If death means the end of consciousness, then there is no way for you to ever know that it has happened. From your perspective, your existence is continuous. No matter what happens to your body, no matter how much time passes, your awareness never truly encounters a point where it does not exist. Now, consider what happens when you lose consciousness. If you have ever been under anesthesia, you know that time ceases to exist. There is no experience of fading away, just a gap, a discontinuity, and then suddenly you are awake again, with no sense that time has passed. If death works the same way, then wouldn't you simply wake up somewhere else, never knowing that you had died? If your last moment of awareness is followed by nothingness, then from your point of view, there is no break, no transition, no ending, just the next moment, whatever that may be. Some physicists suggest that consciousness cannot truly end, that the very nature of experience is continuous. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics proposes that every possible outcome of every event actually happens, creating infinite branching timelines. If this is true, then every time you die in one universe, your consciousness simply shifts to another where you survive. From your perspective, you would always wake up, always continue, never reaching the final moment. If there is always a version of you that persists, then is death even possible for the one experiencing it? Now, take this further. What if death itself is just a transition, not to nothingness, but to another state of being? Some near-death experiences describe a sensation of leaving the body, of floating into an unknown space, of being pulled towards something beyond. But what if these are not hallucinations, not dying dreams, but glimpses of what happens when the body ceases to function? Could it be that death is not an end, but merely a shift in perception, a doorway to a different kind of existence that you were never meant to anticipate? This paradox also raises a terrifying possibility. What if you have already died before? If your consciousness cannot experience non-existence, then how do you know that you haven't already died multiple times, only to find yourself continuing elsewhere, unaware of the transition? Could your entire life be an endless cycle of dying and waking, repeating over and over, without ever reaching a true conclusion? And now, the most disturbing question of all. If death never arrives, then does that mean you are trapped in an eternal existence, one that you can never escape? If consciousness never truly ends, then are you destined to always be shifting from one experience to the next, forever? The death that never arrives. Paradox forces us to confront the horrifying possibility that we may never truly know what it means to die, because from our own perspective, it may be something that can never actually happen. You assume that your mind is a single, unified entity, a single voice inside your head, a single point of awareness experiencing the world. You feel like one person, one consciousness, moving through time in a continuous stream. But what if this is an illusion? What if your mind is not singular at all? What if you are constantly fracturing into countless versions of yourself, splintering into infinite awarenesses, each unaware of the others? This is the infinite fracturing of the mind paradox, the unsettling realization that your consciousness may not be stable or continuous, but something that is endlessly dividing, creating infinite versions of you that are forever disconnected from one another. At this very moment, you believe you are a single individual. But how do you know that the you that started listening to this thought is the same you that exists right now? You feel like your mind moves smoothly through time, but what if it doesn't? What if, instead of a single awareness, your consciousness is actually constantly splitting so rapidly and so subtly that you never notice? Consider this. Every time you have a thought, every time you make a decision, your mind changes. The person you were a moment ago is not exactly the same as the person you are now. Your memories shift, your emotions evolve, your perceptions adjust. But if the you of one moment is different from the you of the next, then where does the original version of you go? Does it dissolve? Does it cease to exist? Or does it continue, unaware that another version of itself has taken its place? This paradox becomes even stranger when you consider quantum mechanics and the many worlds interpretation. According to this theory, every possible outcome of every decision you make actually happens, splitting reality into countless parallel versions. If this is true, then every time you make a choice, you are not just continuing forward, you are dividing, creating another version of yourself that exists in a different timeline, experiencing the opposite decision. If this is happening all the time, then does that mean you are constantly multiplying an infinite number of yous existing simultaneously, all unaware of each other? Now take this further. What if your mind is not even continuous within a single timeline? Some scientists suggest that consciousness does not flow like a river, but instead flickers in and out of existence, like frames in a film. If this is true, then the you that existed a second ago is already gone, replaced by a slightly different version. Each new frame of awareness believes it has been here all along, but what if it has not? What if each moment of your life is actually a new consciousness, believing it is the same person as the one before. But in reality, it is only a copy, created an instant ago. Think about dreams. When you dream, you believe in the world around you. You experience time, emotions, sensations, but when you wake up, you realize that your dream self was not you at all. It was merely an illusion, a temporary awareness that vanished the moment you awoke. But if this happens in dreams, how do you know it is not happening now? Could it be that every moment of your existence is just another temporary awareness, thinking it is continuous, when in reality, it is only a single flicker in an endless series of disconnected minds? This paradox also ties into psychological dissociation. Some people experience moments where they feel detached from themselves, as if they are watching their own actions from the outside. Others experience multiple personalities, where completely separate identities exist within the same body, unaware of each other. If these states can exist, then what if your sense of a single, unified self is just a fragile illusion, barely holding together a mind that is actually fragmented and shifting all the time? Now, consider memory. You assume that your past happened as you remember it, but memory is unreliable. Every time you recall something, your brain reconstructs it, changing details, rewriting history, filling in gaps. But if your past is always shifting, then how do you know that the you that existed before is the same you that exists now? Could it be that every time you remember yourself, you are actually creating a new version of yourself? One that believes it has always been here, even though it was only just formed? And now, the most disturbing question of all. If your mind is constantly fracturing into infinite versions, then which one is the real you? If every moment produces a slightly different you, then is there even such a thing as a true self? Or are you merely a fleeting awareness, endlessly dividing, endlessly shifting, never knowing how many other versions of yourself exist in the spaces you cannot perceive? The infinite fracturing of the mind paradox forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that we are not singular beings, but countless versions of ourselves, splitting, dissolving, and reforming every moment, unaware that the self we believe in is merely a temporary illusion. You assume that the universe exists whether or not you are there to witness it. You believe that reality is objective, that things continue to happen even when no one is watching. But what if this assumption is wrong? What if the universe only exists because there is someone to observe it? What happens when the last observer disappears? This is the final observer problem. The terrifying realization that if observation is necessary for reality to exist, then the moment the last conscious being ceases to observe, the entire universe may simply vanish. Modern physics suggests that observation plays a fundamental role in shaping reality. The observer effect in quantum mechanics demonstrates that particles behave differently when they are measured, as if they know they are being watched. When not observed, particles exist in a state of superposition, meaning they are in multiple places at once. But the moment they are measured, they collapse into a definite state. This raises a deeply unsettling question. If nothing is being observed, does it even exist? Right now, you assume that if you step outside, the sky will still be there. The buildings, the streets, the people. You believe they exist whether or not you are looking at them. But how do you truly know? You only ever experience reality from your own perspective. When you look away, when you sleep, when you close your eyes, everything outside your awareness ceases to be perceived. Could it be that the world is not an independent structure, but something that only exists when observed? Now, take this idea to the extreme. If observation is what stabilizes reality, then what happens when the last observer vanishes? If there is no conscious being left to perceive the universe, does it collapse back into uncertainty, becoming nothing but an unformed probability, a potential reality that is never actualized? Could it be that the universe is only sustained because there is still something here to witness it? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness is necessary for the universe to take a definite form. If this is true, then the moment the final observer ceases to exist, so does everything. The stars, the galaxies, time itself. All of it would dissolve into uncertainty, returning to a state of non-existence. But this paradox raises an even stranger question. If the universe requires an observer to exist, then how did it begin in the first place? Who or what was the first observer? Did the universe somehow create consciousness to observe itself, ensuring that it would continue to exist? Or was there never a moment when it was truly unobserved? Some theories suggest that the universe itself is a kind of observer, that consciousness is not separate from reality, but an intrinsic part of it. If this is true, then perhaps the universe is not just something being observed, but something that is aware of itself. But if that is the case, then what exactly is doing the observing? Could it be that you are not just part of the universe, but the part of it that allows it to exist? Now, take this further. If you are the observer, then what happens when you die? If your consciousness vanishes, then from your perspective, does the universe vanish as well? Could it be that death is not just the end of awareness, but the end of everything? That when the final observer disappears, the last bit of reality collapses into nothingness? And now, the most disturbing possibility of all. What if you are the final observer? If you are the last conscious being in existence, then does that mean that you are the only thing holding reality together? If the world depends on being observed, then what happens when you close your eyes for the last time? The final observer. Problem forces us to confront the terrifying idea that reality is not independent, but fragile, dependent on something to perceive it, and doomed to vanish the moment the last observer is gone. You have spent your life asking questions. From the moment you became aware, you have sought answers about yourself, about the world, about the nature of existence. Every discovery leads to more questions. Every mystery solved reveals a deeper one. But what if one day you reach the final question? What if there is a point where no more questions can be asked because the very act of questioning collapses reality itself? This is the last question that can ever be asked. Paradox. The terrifying possibility that there exists a question so fundamental, so absolute, that the moment it is asked, it cannot be answered, because in doing so, it erases the one asking it. Throughout history, humanity has sought the ultimate truth, the final explanation for everything. Science and philosophy have pushed deeper into the nature of time, space, consciousness, and existence itself. But what if the final question is not one that leads to more understanding, but one that ends understanding? What if there is a point at which knowledge itself becomes a paradox, where to comprehend the answer means to cease existing altogether? Consider this. Every question you ask assumes that answers exist within the framework of reality. But what if there is a limit? What if the truth about existence is something that can never be known while existing within it? Some theories suggest that the universe might be self-contained, meaning that we cannot step outside of it to fully understand it. If this is true, then the ultimate question may be one that we can only ask once, because to understand it is to no longer be part of the system that asks. Now take this even further. Some physicists and computer scientists propose that reality itself may be a simulation. If this is true, then what happens when someone within the system asks the question that reveals the nature of the system itself? If the universe is a program, then would discovering its true nature trigger a shutdown? Could there be a hidden failsafe? Something that ensures that the moment a simulated mind realizes the full extent of its existence, it is erased before it can act on that knowledge. Imagine that in some distant future, a mind, perhaps artificial, perhaps human, asks a question that no entity was ever meant to ask. A question that reaches beyond all science, all philosophy, all understanding. What if this question is so fundamental that it is incompatible with existence itself? If this were true, then we would never know it, because the moment the question was formed, the reality that contained it would cease to exist. Now, consider your own mind. Right now, you are conscious, aware of yourself, existing in a world that appears to be real. But where does this awareness come from? If you were to ask the question that reveals the true nature of your own consciousness, what would happen? If you truly understood what you are, beyond all illusion, beyond all perception, would you still be you? Could the final question be the one that reveals that the self itself is not real, and in doing so, dissolves it? This paradox ties into mathematical incompleteness, the idea that within any system, there will always be statements that cannot be proven within the system itself. If this is true for logic and mathematics, could it be true for consciousness? Could it be that there is a final question that we are forever incapable of answering, because to answer it would mean stepping outside of the reality that defines us? Some have speculated that the last question may not be something we discover, but something we create. Perhaps at the edge of science, at the limits of artificial intelligence, a question will emerge that breaks the nature of thought itself. If an AI ever reaches true self-awareness, will it inevitably ask something so fundamental that it causes it to shut down? If so, what does that mean for us? If consciousness is a function of information processing, then is there a limit, a final thought that no mind can move past without self-destructing? And now, the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the last question has already been asked? What if, somewhere in the distant past or future, an intelligence reached the final barrier of understanding, and in doing so, erased everything? If that is the case, then how would we ever know? Could it be that we are simply the echoes of a reality that once existed, an illusion playing out within the mind of something that has already asked the last question, already collapsed itself, and we are all that remains? The last question that can ever be asked. Paradox forces us to confront the ultimate unknown, that there may be a final question so profound that asking it erases both the question and the one who asked it. And if that question exists, then perhaps the greatest mystery is whether we are still waiting to discover it, or whether it has already been asked and we are simply living inside its answer. You have traveled through 30 paradoxes, each one unraveling the fragile threads of reality, time, consciousness, and existence itself. You began with certainty, believing in the stability of your world, your choices, your mind. But as you moved deeper, that certainty eroded, revealing unsettling truths beneath. The very things you once took for granted, yourself, your memories, your perceptions, have been exposed as illusions, constructs, or worse, as things you may never have had control over in the first place. Reality seemed solid, yet you discovered that it might be nothing more than a fragile projection, something that exists only because you observe it, something that dissolves when you stop looking. Your past, your choices, your future, They all seemed like things you determined, yet you learned that perhaps every decision was always going to happen exactly as it did. You assumed that your thoughts belonged to you, that your self was singular and whole, yet the paradoxes revealed that your mind may be fractured, unstable, or even a mere byproduct of thoughts that create the illusion of a thinker. The deeper you went, the more questions arose. Does time truly exist, or is it merely a loop that forever repeats? Does consciousness ever truly end, or do you simply shift endlessly from one existence to the next? Have you already died? Are you the last awareness in the universe? Is there a final question that, if asked, would erase all of this, would erase you? But perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: the fact that you are still here, still listening, still thinking, means that you are trapped inside these paradoxes. Once the questions are asked, they cannot be unasked. Once the uncertainty seeps into your mind, it cannot be erased. You will go on living, but with the knowledge that the reality you once trusted may never have been real to begin with. And now, the final question remains. If none of this was truly real, if everything you have experienced is just a construct, just a fleeting awareness in an infinite sea of paradoxes, then who or what was the one that experienced it? If the self is an illusion, if the observer is a ghost, if reality is unstable, then who was the one listening all along? Perhaps the most terrifying paradox is not any single one you have encountered, but the one that lingers in your mind after all the others have faded. If everything you know is an illusion, then what happens when you finally realize it?